Good morning and happy Tuesday. I hope you'll have your coffee in hand, preferably Cuban coffee. My name is Maria Carla Chicuen and I am the Executive Director of CasaCuba. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for Perspectivas, a series which CasaCuba is proud to present in partnership with the College of Business at Florida International University, our FIU. Before we begin, I would like to share a bit about CasaCuba. CasaCuba is a historic initiative of FIU to develop a leading cultural center and think tank for the study of Cuban affairs and the celebration and preservation of the Cuban heritage. The project has secured a prominent site right at the entrance of the main FIU campus to build an iconic facility. Our future home will feature galleries for interactive exhibits, classrooms to teach FIU's more than 70 courses on Cuba, a state-of-the-art venue for events, artistic performances, and dynamic programming such as Perspectivas. CasaCuba aspires to be a thriving hub for arts and culture and a policy and business forum devoted to Cuba, a place where we will remember Cuba's past, gather the experts to analyze Cuba's present, and come together as a community to inspire our future. This panel series, Perspectivas, represents CasaCuba's vision to connect the past, the present, and the future of Cuba and the Cuban community from around the world. Our program features prominent Cuban business leaders for intimate conversations about their Cuban roots and family story, their inspiring ascent to their present success, and their take on the future of their industries. In these conversations, across the many individual stories of leadership, there is always a common element: the Cuban spirit of resilience, innovation, and grit. Perspectivas is just a taste of what you will experience at CasaCuba when we build our future home. Today's conversation will explore the leadership of Cuban women in the banking industry, with perspectives from our very own Cristina Di Mauro, Senior Executive Vice President of Commercial and Corporate Banking at Bank United Florida, and Maggie Villacampa, Wealth Advisor and Managing Director at Wells Fargo. They will be introduced by our moderator, Natalia Martinez Kalinina. Natalia is an organizational psychologist and technologist focused on merging innovation, entrepreneurship, and impact. Most recently, she led the expansion of the Cambridge Innovation Center, CIC, to Miami. Natalia has prior experience as Chief Innovation and Technology Officer in the nonprofit sector and as strategy leader for technology companies. She is also the founder of Awesome Foundation Miami, Aminta Ventures, and the Immigrant Powered Initiative. She holds a BA in psychology from Harvard University and a master's in organizational psychology from Columbia University. At a time when women are breaking the long-standing glass ceiling in the banking sector, when just last month the first woman was appointed to lead a big Wall Street bank, it fills us with pride that Cuban women are influencing the future of this vital industry. I would like to thank Natalia, Cristina, and Maggie, three extraordinary leaders, for coming together in conversation this morning. Thank you also to our friends and partners at the College of Business and the CasaCuba team for the hard work behind the scenes to coordinate this event. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope to see you at future Perspectivas and CasaCuba and FIU business events, and I invite you to get involved in the once-in-a-lifetime effort to build our CasaCuba. There are many ways to support the project and become a founder, and we need your help to make our dream a reality. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Good morning, everybody. Apologies for the delay in unmuting myself. Welcome to everybody who's joining us. Thank you. I want to echo Maria Carla's thank you to CasaCuba and all of the folks and entities and departments at FIU that have participated in the Perspectivas talks that we've had along the course of this year, and this one in particular. So thank you for making this happen and for bringing these conversations to bear. I think they're one of the exciting things. I believe we can all agree that one of the exciting things that has come from the pandemic is a lot more virtual content that hopefully is accessible and relevant, in this case, not just to FIU students and FIU alumni, but also members of the community. So thank you for putting this together, and thank you for all of our attendees. On a small logistical note before we get started talking to our fantastic panelists, I want to encourage everyone to submit questions along the way. So we'll try to leave some time at the end for Q&A, but it's also really helpful for me if you have a really interesting question or idea or something that we're talking about in the conversation sparks your curiosity or your interest. You don't have to save that question towards the end. Feel free to ask it. I'll be monitoring the Q&A section within Zoom, as will the CasaCuba team. So we will keep an eye on those. And if there are questions that I can weave in as we go along the way, I'm more than happy to do so. So just a reminder, you don't have to save your questions towards the end. So kind of kicking us off, I think this is a really fascinating topic. We've had a really broad range of discussions over the course of Perspectivas, but I like the moments where we get to dive a little bit deeper. And in this context, I think we get to dive a little bit with more nuance into a couple of things. So the finance and banking sector overall, which I think some of the folks in attendance are really interested in learning more about, as well as some of the topics around gender and gender equity and parity in a traditionally male-dominated industry, which I'm sure many people can identify with and hopefully find some really interesting lessons with. So Maggie and Christina, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to get this conversation going. So to kind of setting the stage, let's start with a brief introduction. I always find that folks do a better job introducing themselves with more color than the moderator ever does. So if you can walk us a little bit through your background, your personal trajectories, obviously your work, it would be great to set the stage. So Maggie, let's start with you.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. So my name is Maggie Villacampa. I'm a FIU alum, a proud FIU alum, and I've been in the banking industry, oh my God, you guys are going to date me now, but about 30 years or a little bit over. I started in the Southeast Bank Training Program many moons ago, worked for Southeast First Union, Wachovia. I was there for about 18 years in different aspects, in management, branch management, specialty banking, and ultimately in wealth management. And then about 13 years ago, went over to U.S. Trust, which is now Bank of America Private Bank, and was there till December of 2019, which I returned home to Wells Fargo and now with the private bank. And what I do is I do wealth management. I deal with our high net worth and ultra high net worth clients and their families and their businesses to accommodate all their needs, whether it's on the credit side, on the investment side, on the estate planning side, and really become a trusted advisor to them. I'm also a mom to two children. I have a 21-year-old daughter and a 20-year-old Gabriela Sofia and a 20-year-old son Daniel, both college students. I'm married, so I juggle young adults, and I have an elderly mom that I juggle as well. So I am in the sandwich generation, as they say. I'm also involved in a couple of organizations here in Miami. In our household, we believe it's very important to give back, and be involved in our community is important. So that's what I do for love, and I love to travel.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Christina?
Maggie, that's a hard act to follow.
You do very well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, like Maggie, I've been in banking my entire career. My very first job after high school actually started in mortgage banking. And then after spending 4 fantastic years at FIU, I joined what was then the SunTrust Commercial Associate Training Program. So similar trajectory. I was with SunTrust and then later SunTrust Robinson Humphrey for the first stint in my career, and then I joined Bank United after the company was reformed and recapitalized by a group of investors in 2009. So in the last crisis, and here we find ourselves in the next one, 11 years later. Outside of commercial and corporate banking, which is absolutely my passion, like Maggie, I'm a mom of 2 girls, a little younger. My girls are 11 and 13, so middle school age. That's a lot of fun. Also married. I've been married, I just celebrated my anniversary at the end of September, 18 years. And besides banking and FIU, which are my 2 main passions, besides that, I'm a big time fitness enthusiast and part-time dance teacher. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you both for not just telling us about your professional journey, but sharing a little bit about your personal, kind of the color of your personal lives. It gives a much fuller impression. Obviously, since we're here kind of co-hosted by CasaCuba, I'd love if we take a quick minute just to touch base on your respective kind of Cuban journeys. So if you're Cuban and kind of what your personal family trajectory around that has meant. Well, obviously you are Cuban, but what the personal trajectory around your family has meant. Whoever wants to start.
I'll go. So I consider myself very, very Cuban. I've raised my children to consider themselves Cuban, although my connection to the island is very limited. My parents have been in the United States since the 50s. And so I was born there by accident. My grandmother was having eye surgery, and my mother was going to go. My parents were already American citizens, so it was kind of a little easier in the beginning of the 60s, right after the revolution. And my mother was pregnant. Back then, eye surgery was a big deal. When my mother got there, my grandmother and everybody else decided that if I couldn't be born, Spanish, because that's where the heritage came from, Cuban was the next best thing. And so I was born Cuban. And I left the island with 3 months. 3 months later, because it was very difficult for my mother. I went in my mother's belly, and when it was time to leave, they wanted to know where my papers were. So my mother said, well, she doesn't have any papers. She came with me, and she's an American citizen. She's born of American citizen parents. And the Cuban government at the time said, well, she's Cuban born, and when she's 18, she can decide what nationality she wants. But right now she's Cuban. And it took all of 3 months to find a way to get me out. So that's my connection to the island, but raised in a very proud Cuban family. So.
Wow, what a colorful beginning story.
All right, so I've never actually been to Cuba, sadly. But my story is a little bit similar in as much as I was actually born in Miami by accident. My parents obviously were already married and actually were living in the Dominican Republic. At the time, my father was in medical school there, and they happened to be in Miami visiting family over the Christmas holiday. And I came and was born January 3rd, so they were still here when I was born. So very lucky to have been born in the US, was here only for a few days, went back to the Dominican Republic, and then to Baltimore, where he did his residency, and ultimately made my way back to Miami when I was about 6 years old, and have been living here ever since. But grew up in a very Cuban household, did not actually speak English until I started school in Miami at 6 years old. And likewise, have raised my family now, my own girls, to be very proud of the tradition, and they certainly consider themselves Cuban Americans as well. So very grateful to everything that my parents and grandparents brought with them emotionally from the island and intellectually, and have shared with me over the course of my life.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. Okay, so let's kind of start our discussion. I would say a little bit more on the kind of financial industry side, since I think that probably is top of mind for some of the folks joining us. So I think the first question is probably the most obvious. We've been in a little bit of a tumultuous year, to put it mildly, just in general across the board. The pandemic has, in addition to the health and the public health perspective, has also thrown a lot of economic news on everyone's radar and everyone's plates. And I think people have definitely been commenting often about the financial markets and just the banking and the finance sector in general. So I'd be curious, obviously both of you work in different topics and you have access to different parts of the industry, not all of them. So very kind of caveating that and aware of it. But how have you seen kind of the broader world of finance and banking react and be affected by the pandemic and the global events of this year? Can you tell us a little bit of your perspective and insight?
Maggie, you want to keep this cadence and you go first?
We'll have to alternate. When it comes to people, I'll let you go first. So I think the banking world in general has realized really early on that the way we did business was not going to be feasible, and we had to adjust to meet our clients' needs. I'm on the wealth management side, but I think in the branches as well. For banking in general and wealth management in particular, that client contact, that face-to-face interaction is extremely important. And when the stay-at-home orders came in March, we realized really early on that how we did business had come to a halt, and we needed to figure out what else were we going to do and how were we going to stay relevant and top of mind with our clients and really meet their needs when they were going through as difficult times as we are. And I think technology played a huge role, even for those clients of ours that had never wanted to do technology. Zoom became really important, right? And so we replaced that face-to-face contact with a Zoom meeting, because over the phone you hear a client, you hear his voice, but when you look at him on a Zoom call, you get to really analyze that client that you know well. What is he feeling? What are his expressions telling you? And then we adjusted. So what happened as we were dealing with clients, we realized that they were going through all this uncertainty and they wanted a platform to be heard. And so our team developed something that's called, well, we named it a wellness call. And it's really just a touch point for our clients. It wasn't a sales call. We didn't talk about investments. We didn't talk about credit. It was really and we did it for prospects as well. And it was really Mr. Client, Mr. Prospect, how can we help you? We know that you have questions. We know you're fearful. You know, have your uncertainties. How can we help you? And it gave them it gave us a platform to take the temperature where they were, and it gave them a platform to be heard and to tell us what their fears were. And sometimes that's all you need, just to talk to someone.
I would agree with everything said, Maggie. I mean, I think as I look across the industry, and my part of the world in particular, in commercial banking, in some ways it has changed radically, because she's right. Really sort of spending face-to-face time with a customer is sort of at the very heart of what we do, and in particular in their space, right? So if you're analyzing, do we or don't we want to extend credit to this particular company, a lot is learned just by walking around and seeing how the management team at that particular company interacts with each other, how the employees react to the management team, how are their facilities maintained. I mean, there's so much that you get out of physically being there that we've lost. And there's so much relationship building that happens on the front end of a sales cycle in person. So just spending time with people, building that rapport and that trust, we lost all of those arrows that we had in the quiver overnight. So we had to really sort of adjust our thinking and our approach and figure out new ways to do things. In that regard, I think the banking industry is pretty still old school. We have a lot of really slick payment technologies and other things, but in terms of, large relationships that are really sort of intensive, be it from an investment management or a credit perspective, those relationships still very much are built and managed in person on a day-to-day basis. So from that perspective, it's changed a lot. But stepping back a little bit, I think it's really sort of changed not at all in terms of what it is that we do. Because as I think about, what is the crux and the mission of what we're trying to accomplish every day, it's really sort of trying to figure out, how to get from point A to point B, how to help a company do something and enable that, whatever that ambition is that they have, that they wouldn't otherwise be able to accomplish. So in my case in particular, we're a capital provider. So this company would not be able to make that acquisition or build that additional plant or do XYZ without our help. So in this environment, we're still trying to help them bridge that gap and get from that point A to point B. We're just maybe using a different set of tools. So now we're leveraging PPP loans, or we're leveraging the Main Street program, or we are, providing payment deferrals. So we're using different tools, but at the end of the day, the core mission, which is to help companies thrive and be successful and grow despite their many challenges, that hasn't changed at all.
Thank you. And Christina, I'd be curious just kind of to follow up on that. Are you finding that given the particular confluence of variables coinciding this year, kind of on the commercial side, you've had to think more creatively or think more broadly or think differently? Or do you feel like the core of not just kind of the values and the mission, but the core of the processes has remained the same? I know things like the PPP, et cetera, threw some curveballs in terms of how the banking sector had to react quickly. So I'd just be curious in terms of the process. Has the process had to adapt and become more either flexible or different or faster in your experience over the course of the year?
Yeah, I think, the process has changed in two main ways that sort of are striking to me as a credit provider. One thing is, we talk a lot in general in our underwriting processes, or we did historically, about just sort of who is the management team, what is the depth of their bench, what is their experience, etc. And we certainly take that into consideration when making a credit decision. I think that has become much more front and center now, but the conversation has shifted to be not so much about what does their experience look like, what does their resume look like. Now it's a lot more about what is their ability to adapt. How have they been able to or not pivot their business to meet the challenges of today's environment, which are, unless you were around for the last pandemic in the 1900s, you've never dealt with something like this before.
Right.
So I think that the mettle of these management teams is really being tested in very new and different ways. And so our assessment of them is now sort of predicated on a completely different basis. And I think, stepping away from the management team aspect of it and just thinking about, pure quantitative financial analysis, that looks very different today too, because I think for the whole history of banking, generally speaking, past is prelude. You look at somebody's historical financial performance, and on that basis, you gauge their ability to continue to perform going forward. I think in today's environment, likewise, not to say that we ignore historical performance, but that has taken a serious backseat to really sort of analyzing somebody's go forward based on, feasibility of projected performance in what is going to be a much different world going forward. Because besides the immediacy of the healthcare challenges that we're all dealing with, I think in most industries, there's some real fundamental paradigm shifts that are occurring. And so the historical analysis in some cases is rendered not irrelevant, but much less relevant than it had been in the past.
Correct.
Thank
And
you.
can I add one thing also? I think relationships have been tested as well. I think to Christina's point, how a client has been able to adjust on the credit side is important, but also how upfront they have been and how upfront they've been with us, the financial institution. Have they warned us of what is coming? Have they made it more rosy than it is? Honesty and trust is so important in this financial environment, right? For good times and for bad. And so the clients that have, I think, done better in this environment are the ones that have come to their financial institution and said, listen, my business is struggling, and this is what I'm doing to fix it, but this is where I foresee there's going to be a shortfall, and this is where I need you to help me, versus hiding under the covers and not really being upfront with their advisors, or just thinking everything is going to go away. And I think for a financial institution going forward, this is just my personal opinion, when other opportunities come, you're going to remember that, and you're going to give that client that character weight. When I started in banking, you learned all the C's of credit, right? And character was an important one. And I think that character is still important, but we've gone more into capacity and things like that. And I think the pandemic has shown us that character is still an important part of those C's of credit. And we'll remember that going forward.
Thank you. And Maggie, actually following up from a wealth management perspective, since that's such a big area of your focus and expertise, this is clearly a challenging environment, or it seems to be a challenging environment for investors and advisors to kind of find the right return risk combinations for their clients. Can you talk to us a little bit about how this somewhat volatile macroeconomic and political environment of this year has affected what's top of mind for investors and advisors?
Yeah, I think family has become tough. All those things are important, but I think family for our clients have become very important. They had a plan. They built this wealth. They had a plan. This is what they were going to leave for their family. This is how they were going to take care of a tax hit once it happened. This is what they were going to leave to charity, and this was going to be their legacy. Well, if they died yesterday, or they died in April or March during the height of the market being down and everything being in an upheaval, would those plans survive? Would those plans be viable? And would they be able to do for their families what they thought they would be able to do? And I think that has become top. of mind. And so on the economic side, I think our clients have become more informed. They have sat down with their advisors and gone over the what ifs. So what if there is a change in the party that's in power? What if taxes change? What will that do to the market? What will that do to my business? That has been very important, but they've stayed the course. Our investors, I don't see anyone running to the hills. They've stayed invested, they've stayed the course. Where I think there's been more of a shift or more of action is towards the estate planning side of what we do. Because right now there are opportunities that our clients could take advantage of based on their net worth that are going to, regardless of what happens, are going to sunset in a couple of years. So do you take advantage of that now before they sunset? And if there is a change in who's in the White House, then will those changes happen quicker than the sunset time? And will the numbers be lower than you thought they were going to be? So there is a huge opportunity for that high net worth client, that ultra high net worth client, to really do some planning for their family and their legacy. And that's where I think there's been more of an impetus to change. But more importantly, it's education. They do want the information. Whether they do something with it or not, that still remains to be seen, but they're hungry for the information of what our advice is. And we as a firm have been doing a series of calls for our clients and prospects that have a lot to do with the elections. So and they're called things like, what is your plan? What are your next steps? What if? And so clients call in, and a different topic around the change is covered on these calls, and it gives them the information to make decisions that are appropriate for them and their family.
Makes sense. Thank you. Kind of wrapping up this kind of broader topic, I'd be curious, and I know both of you have referenced briefly the kind of continued evolution or the support of the financial industry as it evolves with regards to new technologies and just kind of trying to adjust business models to reflect a more digital ecosystem and the plenty of innovations that exist on that horizon. So I'd be curious what kind of effects or trends you've noticed or experienced firsthand around this kind of intersection of the financial sector and emerging technologies in your field, and what acceleration or kind of new strategies around that you've noticed in particular this year. Any thoughts?
So in my world, we really sort of principally do two things, right? Not to oversimplify, but we help companies with their capital needs, and then we help companies, manage their treasury function, right? So I think, on the treasury side, there's been a lot more digital innovation over the course of probably the last decade in terms of really sort of accelerating payment processes on both incoming and outgoing transactions. I think in this environment, what has really come to the forefront is, really making major investments in cybersecurity, number one, and number two, figuring out, much more open architecture in terms of using APIs to integrate payment systems with client systems, right? So looking at their own ERPs, looking at their own needs from an IT standpoint and figuring out how to integrate that in a seamless way with your financial institution such that, it's really sort of one sort of single source of truth, right? So that has been happening, I think, for a long time and has been accelerated by the pandemic, both in terms of domestic and even global payments. On the credit side, admittedly, I would say the commercial and corporate space is way, way, way behind where the consumer and small business and even crowdfunding space has gone, right? So in those worlds, AI is leveraged in a very big way to auto decision credit and to really figure out, portfolio management tools that are much more real time in nature. In the corporate and commercial space, underwriting is a super manual process even today, and portfolio management largely is happening in arrears, right? Even with the largest of public companies that are able to provide data relatively quickly after a quarter end, you're always looking backwards. So what I'm most excited about as part of this pandemic, and something that I've kind of been working on as a little bit of a side project for some time, is figuring out a way to integrate AI into the commercial space. And so there are some firms out there doing some interesting things. Oak North in particular is one that comes to mind. So Featra is another. But these companies are trying to figure out ways to not entirely automate, because there is, I think, still a human element of decision making and assessment that has to happen, but to sort of figure out a way to not start each underwriting project from scratch, right? To aggregate data that's available from public and private sources to at least create a base case model in terms of an underwriting exercise, and then start from there refining and sort of figuring out how you want to customize a structure and a potential risk analysis for a given borrower. But I think now there's some real energy building around that, and I think it's time, because like I said, commercial banking has been way behind in terms of adoption of new tools like AI vis-a-vis some of our counterparts in consumer lending and other places who are really sort of a generation, I think, ahead of us in terms of where they've gone with it.
Thank you.
So I completely agree with Christine. I think technology is exploding. And I will tell you that in our firm, fourth quarter of 2019, we had 30.3 million users, digital users, and that was either on a mobile app or online. And we always knew that that was going to grow. JD Powers did a wonderful survey this year in 2020. They wanted to know what how the consumers were acting differently because of the pandemic, right? With their online and digital use. And they found, they had 2,000 participants, and they found that of those 2,000 participants, 30% of them were using mobile apps more than the pandemic. 35% of them were using online services more than previous the pandemic. And that's a trend that we as a company, and obviously that survey shows, is going to continue way into 2021 and further. And for those reasons, I think the financial service companies are finding innovative ways to do things differently, to make our clients' lives easier. And our company's goal has never been, let's do technology for technology purposes. Let's innovate, but let's make that a choice the client wants to do, right? Let them have an informed decision as to what works for them, so they can do accomplish what they want to accomplish, when they want to accomplish it, and where. And there's two things that I think are great that Wells is doing right now, and really I did a little research, because I wasn't really sure I know what we're doing for our wealth clients, and life continues a little bit, but I wanted to see what we were doing mainstream. And I will tell you, there's one thing that I really, really love. They have something called digital waitlist, and that's being piloted here in Miami. And if any of us have gone to the doctor, to the vet lately through this pandemic, you arrive, you call them, you wait in your car, they come, if you're at the vet, they pick up the dog goes, you still wait, and you have no idea, you have no time management anymore for what you're doing. With digital waitlist, a client, if they don't have an appointment at the branch, they can call the banker. The banker waits lists them, holds their spot, and that client can go sit in the car and read a book, but they know what time it is. They can run an errand nearby, and then the banker will call them and say, Mr. Client, you have 10 minutes to come back. And the client comes back and their time is held, which I think is fabulous. And one of the other thing is perspective banking. So for those of our clients that are using online banking, there's a wonderful tool. It's an app within that app that allows clients, let's say that you're concerned about your spending and your saving. Well, that perspective banking will give you individualized insight to your spending and to your saving needs, and tools, so that if what you want to do is save more, you can implement those tools that have been customized for you. In addition to that, it analyzes your spending habits. So if you, based on your patterns, if you have something that's coming up that is going to require X amount of dollars and your balance is in there, it'll send you a little note and saying, based on historical spending, this is coming up, this is your balance, and these are ways that you can transfer money in. So I think technology is huge. I think we are innovating every day more and more. And even the clients that didn't want to use them, once they do one little thing, they're hooked.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for adding a little bit more color. Kind of switching gears a bit more to some more personal topics. So both of you are seasoned and very well-respected leaders at your companies in the field and the sector overall. So obviously looking at the attendees that we have here today, we have many people at an earlier stage in their professional and career journeys. And so switching a little bit to address some of the topics that have come up there, can you share with us a bit of your kind of both, it's a two-part question. So something that you're particularly proud of along your trajectory, kind of your professional trajectory, and specifically your growth into leadership roles, as well as something that has been kind of particularly challenging or a really kind of interesting lesson that you would like to share.
Well, Christina, you want me to go first, or you want to go?
Sure.
Or?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I may not remember the whole question because that's a long one. I think challenging when I started out. So I knew who I was and how I worked. And when I started in management, I assumed everyone was like Maggie, right? The things that motivate Maggie were the things that motivated them. The things that made me want to do something were the same things for them. And I quickly realized that that wasn't working. I wasn't getting the response that I needed because I wasn't looking at that person for what they needed and used my leadership skills to motivate them. And so I wasn't getting the results that I needed. And then what ended up happening, because I'm a doer and I wasn't getting the results that I needed and I wasn't really fixing the problem, how I was fixing the problem is that if we had a deadline or numbers that needed to be booked or something, I was doing that job as well, right? And I remember sitting in front of my boss at the time. I was so proud of my numbers and I thought this was going to be a great review. And he said, you know, your numbers are great. Your area is doing wonderfully, but you're doing a horrible job. And it really shocked me because that's not the comment that I expected. And I said, he says, yes, because you're doing your job and you're doing the job I didn't hire you to do. Your job is to motivate those individuals. And it took a lot of analysis and a lot of learning and a lot of taking a step back and a lot of humility to kind of realize that, you know, that when you lead, you don't lead because of how you are, you lead because of how your people are. And you have to be inclusive. And by being inclusive is learning their modes of operandi and what things that move them. Did I leave anything out?
You answered the question. Yeah. Well, it was the two parts were a particular challenge, which I think you've answered on your leadership journey. And if you have something else that you feel particularly proud of, that's either a lesson or a milestone.
Well, I don't know if it's a lesson or a milestone, but I'm extremely proud of our team during this time. I think everyone has stepped up, gone beyond what we would have expected, been accountable, and a lot of because they want to do what's right for the clients. So if I'm proud of anything, is I'm proud of how we've been handling this situation.
Yeah. You know, to give a different example, maybe, and not reiterate what Maggie just said, I think for sure, likewise, I would have probably started there and said, you know, I'm really proud of how, you know, my team in particular, our company in particular, but really the whole industry. And you know, in many ways, our entire community has really risen to the challenge and showed an immense amount of compassion and really just demonstrated what the human spirit can do in terms of resiliency. We're not perfect by any stretch, but we've certainly stepped up in a very big way. But about me personally, I would say one of the things I'm most proud of, and I don't know that I can entirely take credit for it, is, you know, I've been very lucky in my career to have had some really fantastic mentors. And as I transitioned in my own journey from being more of an individual banker ultimately into running a team and then running a division and so on and so forth, you know, they really sort of instilled in me from the get-go this concept of servant leadership. And really understanding that, you know, leadership is not about ego. It's about being willing to walk the walk and do the hard things and not just to talk the talk. So I think what I'm most proud of is really having made flawed, I'm sure, but really concerted effort to meet that. And I think if you asked anybody who works for me today, they would tell you that I'm always there to say, look, if we have to deliver bad news, or if we have to turn somebody down, or if we have to, do something that's really sort of gut wrenching, I will be by their side in that trench, facing that fire head on with them. I'm proud of that, and I think that really builds loyalty in spades. In the same breath, I would tell you that the biggest challenge that I've experienced, as you manage all different kinds of people in your career that are older than you, younger than you, of different ethnicities, of different genders, you name it, you're always going to find certain people that you have chemistry with. And I think, just human nature, you end up investing, maybe over investing in some of those people, right? You take a particular interest in their journey, you take a particular interest in their development, you really try to put them in situations where they can be successful, you give them opportunities, you do all of these things. And I think that the biggest challenge as a leader is that you sometimes find you don't always get it back. There's some cases and there's some people who, doesn't matter how much loyalty you display to them, you're not going to get it back. Doesn't matter how much you invest in them, they're not going to pay that forward to the people that they're leading in turn, right? Because as you manage more and more people, now the people underneath you are also managing teams and are also responsible for others. And so I think while that is a huge challenge, it's really sort of an overwhelming minority of people. So you can't let yourself get overly disappointed or bogged down and said, my God, I've spent 5 years mentoring this person or whatever, and it's just not working, or they decided to, make a left turn or whatever. You can't let that discourage you from still sort of sticking to your DNA and doing what you know is the right thing, and still sort of taking that personal interest and investing all this emotional capital in your people, because, out of 50 people that you do that for, if one or two don't get it, that's okay. Because the other 48 do, and it's just really sort of gratifying to see that other people flourish because of what you put into them. So it's what I'm most proud of, and it's also the biggest challenge in different kind of ways.
Thank you. I understand that. I'm going to pause for a moment to address some of the questions that we've gotten so far from attendees, because I think they cluster around some themes that lead nicely off of our current conversation. So we've had a couple of questions about mentorship. So kind of how have you benefited from mentors, who your mentors have been, and how you address mentoring in terms of the mentoring that you do, as well as any kind of particular suggestions or advice you have for students that are looking for students. And one of the questions was specifically for young women interested in a career in banking. So what kind of mentorship programs you know of or can recommend to others. So who your mentors have been, how your philosophy about mentorship, and what mentorship programs you would recommend to young people starting their careers.
So I started in the Southeast Training Program, which was an 18-month program, which was full of mentors. The program, it came embedded with people that were willing and wanting to give you advice and help you along the way. I'm sure your program and SunTrust was very similar. I'm a huge believer in mentorship. I was very fortunate. When I started in my career, there were 2 female leaders at the time who took an interest in me. As Christina has said before, when you lead some people, you have that chemistry, or you have that belief in them, and you want to help because someone helped you. And I was very fortunate that became my road. They took me under their wing. I think the important thing about mentorship is not only to have them, but to really act on the advice that is given to you. These people take their time and their effort, and you need to look at what they're offering and incorporate them, even if it takes you out of your comfort zone, because sometimes taking you out of your comfort zone takes you to the next level. I believe in mentors not only in work. I think you can have mentors outside of the workforce, people that in your life, for whatever reason, fill the look or the goal of what you would like to be. People that, you take an assessment of yourself and you know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. We all have them. So if you find in a mentor someone that really encompasses what your weaknesses are and makes them strengths, that's someone that can really move you forward. I would suggest that students start as early as possible. You can start with a professor. You can start with an upperclassman, someone that you feel can help you on your route. Our institutions, there was a time when training programs were a big deal. They're few and far in between today, but they still happen. I would look into those programs while you're still at school and investigate if finance is what you want to do, if banking is what you want to do. Check to see what the big firms, which usually have the bigger programs, the Cities, the Merrills, the Bank of America, the Wells Fargos. What are they offering in terms of those programs? Because you're going to get a crash course, and you have a foot in the door. May not be where you want to stay, but you have a foot in the door. I think, again, I'm a huge believer in mentorship. And what do we do? Along the course of my career, there have people that have worked for me and with me that have been younger, and in one case, slightly older, that have asked me, point out, Maggie, listen, you do this well. I really would like to learn from you. Is that possible? Can I shadow you? Of course you can shadow me. I've done that with even some peers that are in competition with me. But if you can sit in a meeting of mine, I'm more than happy to let you know. I am a firm believer there's business for everyone, and I believe in karma. So that's my take.
Yeah, it's a tough time for sure to be coming out as a graduate or a recent graduate now, and to be out looking for your first foot in the door, as Maggie said, in industry for sure. I'm concerned for you guys for sure. There's a difficult environment out there right now, and the programs that Maggie and I benefited from, she's right, are much fewer and far between today. Bank United in particular is starting one in partnership actually with FIU. So reach out to FIU Business if you want to learn more about that. It's in its nascency. I think we're going to start with a handful of juniors and make it a 2-year program. So we'll be with you through junior and senior year. I don't have all of the details on that, but I know it's something that we're just now putting together for the first time. Our company has only existed for 11 years, so there's a lot of things about us that are new. In terms of more broadly though, mentoring, I would say this, and maybe it's a little counterintuitive, but I've found it to be true. I think mentoring, it really has to be a two-way street. And what I mean by that is, in order to really get the most out of your mentor, in my mind, I think you also should be mentoring somebody else. And the reason why I say that is because there's always people who are, 1 or 2 or 5 steps behind you. Even like she mentioned, if it's a junior classman, if it's somebody in your family, whatever the case may be, somebody who just got to this country a month ago and doesn't know, anything about where to even begin to sort of organize their life. If you are in active mentorship of someone, then I think you get a much deeper and better understanding of what that relationship is and can be. And it allows you to better explore with your mentor and really sort of pick the places where you need help and pick the places where you can really benefit from their skill set and figure out how to do that. I think if you're on both sides of the conversation, you garner some pretty unique insight. So I would say that as it relates more so to sponsorship, so looking for somebody inside of your own organization to help you move forward, that's a little bit different than mentorship. And I think, in order to find some success there, you have to really sort of make a concerted effort to demonstrate your own value. So if you've identified somebody in the company that you're already working for that you want to make time in their professional life to sponsor you, come to them with an idea and say, hey, I've realized that, you're really shorthanded in area X. Is there something that I could do on my off hours or overtime or, whenever to sort of help you and be another set of hands or be another resource for you, or, figure out a way to bring them an idea, take something off their plate, demonstrate some value that you can bring to the table, even as a very junior person, to spark that interest and all of a sudden make them realize why making time in their busy schedule to sponsor you and to go above and beyond to give you a little bit more insight into what it is that they do and maybe provide you with an opportunity eventually. That's a really good investment for you to make. And I think that's something that's really necessary in a sponsorship relationship if you don't have, the good fortune of being in a formal structured program where there's going to be, sponsors basically provided to you.
Thank you. I think that's some really great advice, especially for folks starting or considering kind of about to start or starting earlier in their career. So thank you both for sharing with such nuance. I know we're starting to wind down our time together, so I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of highlight or ask you to share some thoughts. You're both women in a still pretty male-dominated industry, especially as kind of you climb up the ranks. And so I'd be curious if you can share a little bit about what your experience being a woman in finance has been, as well as any kind of highlights of advice that you'd have to women entering the field today.
I'll go, I guess.
Christina, we can start with you.
Yeah. So I've said this a little bit till I'm blue in the face in lots of different forums, and not everybody agrees with it, but I'm gonna say it again anyways. I think, it's a very personal decision, being a female in banking, being somebody who's from a little bit of a different ethnicity in banking, or really in industry on the whole. There's lots of things about Maggie and I and others like us that put us in that other category. Some of us check many of those other boxes, and you have to sort of make a decision, I feel like, pretty early on what you want to do with that. I think, in generations past, the expectation was that the only option was to sort of mute that, right? You had to take on somewhat male characteristics in your form of dress and your speech and the way you carried yourself, and that was sort of the only path available to be taken seriously. I think today that's really different, and if that's what makes you feel comfortable and that's how you want to try and bridge the gap, that's certainly, an option. But what I have found is that it's not the only way anymore, and a lot of times the real value is, in fact, in having lots of different people at the table. And, I found that, better decisions come out of differing points of view. And I think a lot of times better outcomes for everybody involved, all the constituents, whether it's employees, clients, you name it. Having that variety of perspective is really sort of a huge benefit. And so, I was thinking about this question yesterday when you raised it, and I remember very, very early in my career, probably the first big kind of conference event that I attended in banking happened to be in a really traditional Southern city, of course, primarily attended by A, mostly men, B, I was in my early 20s and most people there were probably in their mid 50s, and C, very few Hispanics. And, coming from Miami, a lot of that was not really on my radar. So I showed up to this conference and I thought I was very professional looking in my suit, and here I go, and I'm gonna walk in, and I didn't put two and two together, and my suit was like tomato red, right? And I thought I looked very professional. And so this one lady who I had befriended comes up to me and she's like, do you realize that everybody in this entire conference of like 300 people is talking about your suit? And I was like, no, what are you talking about? She says, look around the room, and every single person is wearing navy, every single person without fail. And here comes this one little Cuban girl from Miami in this red suit thinking she's all that. And I was like, oh my God. So what do you do, right? You can either run up to your hotel room and change, or you can say, nope, I'm going to use this to spark the conversation and see where this goes and why I'm different and attracting some attention, being positive or negative. Attention is attention. So I think you have to, that's just a silly story, but you have to sort of make that decision early on, and figure out what you want to do with your otherness and how you can use it and potentially own it to your benefit.
The reason I'm laughing is because probably quite a few years before that, I had exactly that same experience with First Union Bank in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was wearing this red suit that I was really proud of. And I walked in and it was all brown, gray, black, and navy blue, and a lot of men. And so it's funny that we had the same thing. I agree with everything Christina says. I don't know, when I started, call it ignorance, but I never considered being female having not having the upper hand. I was so confident that I wanted to do well, and that I was smart, and that I was there to work, and that someone was going to give me an opportunity that I never, I guess, ignorance is bliss. I never felt that I had to do better. I just felt that I had to do well and compete. And I was blessed by having bosses or being in a situation at the time that really gave women an opportunity. So I've never, it's out there, there is that inequality. But again, I love the way Christina phrased it. You own yourself, you own your differences. And really, if you're confident in those differences open doors, because you're remembered, because you make hopefully a good impression, you make an impression, because it's not just how you look, but what you add to that look, all the hard work and your knowledge and the time and effort that you've put in. So I think, and I yes, there's still inequality, but it's a great time to be a female. It's a great time to be a Hispanic female. Just make sure that when you get that next opportunity, you're not getting it because you're a female, and you're not getting it because you're Hispanic. You're getting it because you're a smart, confident, prepared Hispanic female.
Well said.
Thank you. I know we have 1 minute left, so I'm not going to ask my last question, but thankfully we got to all of the questions that folks asked, and a good handful of the ones that we have on our own list. So thank you both so much for sharing your perspective and your experience, your points of advice. I think, as we mentioned earlier at the beginning, we had a lot of students joining us today. And so I think for folks starting their career, you've definitely shared some really incredible points of insight. And so thank you so much for walking us through your thoughts and your perspectives today. It's been really great. What a fantastic session. And thank you again to Maria Carla, Maite, the entire CasaCuba team, CasaCuba, obviously, FIU for hosting us. It's been a really wonderful morning. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I will sign us off there straight on the dot. We are fighting all stereotypes about Miami, and we are starting and ending on time. I'm very proud of us for this.
Thank you, Natalia.
Of course. Well, everyone have a good rest of your day, and thank you for joining.
Bye.
Bye.